All right, good morning again. This is John in Louisville, filling in for Joe today. Way back in October, before all the craziness of the election, I signed up to give this talk to the Heart to Heart community today. And if you remember what was going on back then, we were right on the heels of two back-to-back devastating hurricanes, one in Florida and one in North Carolina. So, in thinking about what the subject would be for today, my initial reaction was to maybe do something involving suffering and the end of suffering, according to the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism. That was the direction I was taking initially. And then in November, Jill filled in for Joe, and she introduced a poet that I was not familiar with named Adrienne Murray Brown. And there was one line in one of the poems that she used that goes like this: Empires fall, rivers flow underground, we are always the water. And that made me think, well, with the floods and the devastation in Florida and North Carolina, maybe what I need to be doing is talking about water. And then a few weeks later, that was really solidified for me when Joe came out with his poem, To Melt or Not to Melt, after his godson graduated. The poem, the line that in Joe's poem that really captured me was, there is only one life with an eternal river running through it. So that sealed the deal for me. And so the title of this talk today is The Uncommon Blessing and Fierce Grace of Water. Joe, would you put up the screensaver, please? You might have seen this before we started, but maybe not. Okay, this photograph is known as the pale blue dot. It's blue because that little dot you see on the right-hand side, about 3/4 of the way up, the photograph is the planet Earth. And it's blue because the predominance of water on the surface of Earth reflects sunlight in a blue wavelength. So that's why it has a pale blue color to it. This photograph was taken in 1990 from the Voyager spacecraft as it was passing the planet Neptune and leaving our solar system for good. And the NASA engineers had planned to turn off the camera system in order to conserve power once it got past Neptune. But Carl Sagan, who was a consultant on the Voyager project, convinced NASA to take one last photograph before they disabled the camera system. So this picture was taken from 3 billion miles from Earth. And and Sagan said, well, NASA's argument was, why do you want to do this? Because it has zero scientific value. And Sagan said, yes, I know it has no scientific value, but it has infinite poetic value. And this is what Carl Sagan had to say about this photograph. It's a blue mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam on which everyone you love, everyone you know, every human being who ever was lived out their lives. So what I want to do today is take you on a deep dive into water. Pardon the pun. So, Joe, you can take down the screensaver now. Thank you. So I'm breaking this up into 4 sections. First section it will be the sacredness of water. And then I want to talk a little bit about the uniqueness of water, because it really is a strange duck. And then I want to talk about the ubiquitous nature of water. You find it pretty much everywhere. And then finally, the connectedness of water. So religions and cultures throughout history have always recognized the sacredness of water. Saint Bonaventure said that God is a fountain of fullness, a water wheel of outpouring love. And I think we should think of God not so much as the creator of water, but rather as the wetness of water, the essential nature of everything, in the same way that God is the essential nature of you and me. And water is at the very foundation of the Judeo-Christian creation story. Right off the bat, in the first chapter of Genesis, the second verse, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was a formless void. There was darkness over the deep, and God's Spirit hovered over the water. The word for spirit there is the Hebrew word ruach, which means breath or wind or energy. So they were trying to make the connection between breath and water. We need both for life. And then later on in Genesis, of course, Moses and the Israelites passed through the parted waters of the Red Sea. And then in the New Testament, Jesus is baptized in the Jordan River. And Jesus's first miracle is to transform water into wine at the wedding of Cana. So in Scripture, water is associated with creation, with deliverance, with purification, and with transformation. There's lots of stories. Every religion, every culture has their own unique creation story. Some of them are really kind of unique and interesting. My favorite one comes from an indigenous culture, the Ojibwe tribe, which was up around the Great Lakes area. Their creation story started with, as many of them do, started with the earth is purified in a flood. And after the flood and the waters start receding, all the humans and all the creatures want to find out, where the soil is, because they can't live without the soil. They can't grow crops, or they can't do anything. So different creatures, including the humans, try in vain to dive down into the water and find the soil. A lot of them try it. A lot of them fail. They just can't dive down that deep. And a lot of them die in the process, according to this story, creation story, until they get to the muskrat. The muskrat dives down and manages to get one paw of dirt from the he finds the bottom, gets one paw of dirt, brings it back up to the surface, and they plant the dirt on the back of a turtle. I have the turtle in the water right here. I don't know if you can see that or not. Anyway, they plant it on the back of a turtle, and it magically grows and grows and grows and turns into an island, and then eventually becomes the continent of North America. I just think it's a really cute story. Other cultures have had rivers as considered holy. For example, the Nile and the Amazon in Africa, the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in the Middle East, the Jordan in Israel, the Tiber River that runs through Rome, and the Ganges in India, which literally means the tears of the goddess Ganga. Raymond Panikar, I don't know if you're familiar with him or not, but he was born in Spain to a Catholic mother and a Hindu father, and he used the world's great rivers as an analogy. He said, none of these rivers meet on earth, but they do meet in the heavens, where water from each of them condenses into clouds that rain down on all creation. In the same way, the religions of the world remain distinct, unmixed on earth, until their essence is transformed and poured out on all humanity. So I think that's a really good way to think of all the different religions. We're really all connected and all one. Okay, now I want to switch gears and talk about the uniqueness of water. One of my favorite poets, Maria Popova, said that we are all borrowed stardust, just waiting to be returned to the universe. So what is water? Everybody knows from high school chemistry, it's H2O, 2 atoms of hydrogen, 1 of oxygen. What could be simpler? Well, to really understand the uniqueness of water, you gotta take a look at its origin. So the very first hydrogen atoms emerged out of the primordial soup of the Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago, when all the building blocks of atoms were created in that event. And then in the first 400,000 years of the universe, the universe did nothing but make hydrogen. All those particles from the original event of the Big Bang produced hydrogen atoms for 400,000 years. And then it stopped. And since then, the universe is out of the hydrogen making business. They're not making any more. So what was left after all the elementary particles were used up are enormously large clouds of hydrogen that began to be drawn together by gravity, an attraction not unlike love, as Teilhard de Chardin would say. And so they gathered into groups, and gravity brought them together closer and closer and closer. And it took millions of years, about 100 million years, for the first star to form, fueled by the hydrogen that was created in the early universe. Oxygen didn't appear until several 100 million years later. Interestingly, the average human body contains about 250 billion hydrogen atoms, which is more than 2.5 times the number of stars in the Milky Way. So every hydrogen atom in our body is over 13 billion years old. So it's no wonder that we feel so damn old. Again, oxygen didn't come along until a few hundred million years later. And water did not appear on Earth until, well, very early in the planet's formation, about 4.5 billion years ago. Most likely brought here on icy asteroids that crashed into the planet. We don't have the technology to make water. We know how to do it, but we don't have the technology because it takes unbelievable amounts of energy. So the water we have here is a finite amount. There ain't no more. So that makes it unique in one respect, but there's also other things about water that are just totally contrary to what you think of most substances will do. For example, the boiling point and freezing point of water is abnormally high for compared to other materials that are similar. And because of that, water is one of the only substances that exist naturally in all three states, solid, liquid, and gas. And most substances, when they get hot, they expand. When they get cold, they contract. Water, when it gets hot, it does expand, but when it gets cold, it also expands. So that's when water turns into ice, ice gets less dense. and and also expands. So that's why ice floats on top of liquid water, and it's also why if you put a can of Coke in your freezer and leave it there, it will explode because it expands about 10%. Other odd things about water, it bends light, it carries sound waves, and it conducts electricity, and it has an unusually high surface tension, which allows really heavy things like boats and battleships and barges to float on water. It's also known as the universal solvent. You can throw anything, pretty much, into water, and given enough time, it will dissolve. And it's also the number one source of erosion of rock and stone. If you have any doubt of that, go out and look at the Grand Canyon sometimes. It was created over billions of years by the Colorado River, which now is just a trickle by the time it gets to the Pacific Ocean. So it's water has a lot of odd aspects to it. And then there's the ubiquitous nature of water. I'm reminded of the the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, water, water everywhere and not a drop to drink. But there is water is a finite resource. We only have so much. So where is all this water? But 70% roughly of the Earth's surface is covered with water. Of that 70%, 97% of that are oceans. And the other 3% is fresh water. But 2% of that 3% is tied up in solid water, or ice, in ice caps, glaciers, and permafrost. So there's only 1% of the water on Earth that is fresh and drinkable. Okay, that doesn't sound like much, but there's enough out there for every human that would fill 6 Olympic-sized swimming pools. But the problem is proximity. There's places on Earth that have abundant water. There's places on Earth that have no water. And sometimes the abundant water causes a lot of damage. So the sustainability, because water is absolutely critical for life, any kind of life, at some point there may be a time when we're going to have to do something creatively about this proximity problem and or maybe population growth. So where else do we find water? Our bodies are 65% water, almost the same as the water on the surface of the Earth. Fruits and vegetables and flowers, things like that, range anywhere from 80 to 96% water. Things like lettuce and cucumbers are almost all water. Trees, the average 40-foot tree It takes in about 50 gallons of water a day with dissolved nutrients from the soil, and then releases oxygen for us to breathe. So every tree is a gift of God's breath for us to breathe. Animals of all descriptions also have a water content ranging from 60 to 70% typically. Even rocks and stones hold water in their porous structures. And then finally, there's 2 to 3% water in the Earth's atmosphere that is in the form of water vapor that is available to return to the planet in the form of life-giving rain, and sometimes destructive storms, as we found out in Florida and North Carolina earlier this year. So that's the basics. They're the basis of the water cycle of the planet, and is also part of our connectedness with everything. So water is associated with fertility, compassion, and love. And this is a poem I ran across by Letitia Ray. Love is like water. We can fall into it. We can drown in it. We can't live without it. Love hovers over the deep. Love flows like a river. Love cleanses and purifies. Love is a thirst for a relationship. Love is delivered to my house in little copper pipes pumped to my door all the way from Baghdad, Kentucky, that is. It's clean and fresh and clear, and it tastes like Kentucky. Most of Kentucky, if you don't know, sits on a large limestone shelf, a remnant of an ancient inland sea. Rainwater filters through the limestone, and it acquires a unique taste after it dissolves minerals from the limestone. It tastes like bourbon, which is 60% water. Before the grain is added and allowed to ferment into alcohol and then aged for 6 years in wooden barrels. And fun fact, there are more barrels of bourbon being aged in warehouses in Kentucky than there are residents of Kentucky. It was a Jeopardy question a few years ago. The water delivered to my house is not the beginning of the water cycle, but feels more like the end of the water cycle to me. For me, the water cycle begins when it rains. So here's how it goes. It's raining outside right now. So the topsoil gets saturated. The water's filtered down through the limestone that's underneath my house, and it trickles into a creek that runs east-west behind me, and eventually empties into the lake that you see behind me in my picture there. That's a lake behind my house. From there, it flows to the west about 3 miles down to a bigger stream called Floyd's Fork. It's named after John Floyd, who was an early surveyor in this area. And it meanders through Valhalla Golf Course, where the PGA Championship was played this summer. And it was also, coincidentally, a site of a skirmish between the Confederate and Union forces during the Civil War. From there, it flows north and empties into the Ohio River and heads downstream toward Louisville, where it goes through a series of locks at the falls of the Ohio. This is why Louisville exists where it does, because back in the day, the rivers were used as the primary way to get goods around the country. And there was a series of cascading waterfalls on the Ohio. So to get around that, Louisville became a place where you could get manpower and wagons and mules to haul your shit out of the Ohio and around the falls, and then they would put it back in and continue on their journey. So that's why Louisville exists where it does. And then later, they built a series of locks that was completed in 1830. And when they did that, they exposed like a 200-acre section of the ancient inland sea, and exposed along with that thousands and thousands of fossils from the Devonian period in the Paleozoic era, from 400 million years ago. So that fossil bed we have in Louisville is the oldest and largest bed of fossils from that age there is in the world. Then west of Louisville, the water continues to flow along the border of Indiana and Illinois, separating that from Kentucky until it meets the Mississippi River, turns south, going down to New Orleans, then into the Gulf of Mexico, then on into the oceans. So I imagine in my feeble brain that the rainfall from my backyard is, at least some of it, is evaporating that whole route from my house down the Ohio, down the Mississippi, into the ocean. And that evaporated water is attaching to dust particles and forming clouds that send rain back to the earth, who knows where. And maybe that rain nourishes, let's say, a wild orange milkweed plant, where a monarch butterfly has laid its eggs, and the caterpillars feed on the leaves and are transformed into the next generation. And just maybe one of those monarchs will wind up feeding on another orange milkweed plant in my own backyard that will help fuel its migration back to Mexico one day. Migration seems like a perfect metaphor for water, changing from solid to liquid to vapor, one form to another, one species to another. Such is the miracle of water, the miracle of life, and the miracle of love. It's all connected. Water is a finite resource, and an endless dance with organic chemistry. So, we need to keep in mind that it's all since we have such a finite resource, it's all the same water that just changes form. Beginning with the asteroids that landed on Earth 4.5 billion years ago, it's exactly the exact same water that's in our oceans, our permafrost, our ice caps, and the clouds. The exact same water was in that ancient inland sea 400 million years ago. It's the exact same water that all the sacred rivers of the earth that flow in all the sacred rivers of the earth. It's the exact same water in the tears of the eyes of a baby boy born in Jerusalem. The exact same water that we add to the chalice of wine at communion. The exact same water in every plant, every tree, every animal, you and me, in the rain in my backyard, and every bottle of Maker's Mark. We are all always connected to everything, everywhere. And I like the way Teresa of Avila puts that. She says, in total union, no separation from God is possible. Like rain falling into river, there's nothing but water. Impossible to divide sky water from land water once the stream enters the sea. So I want to apologize for all the complexity of this talk, but it's a complex subject, so it needs to have an element of complexity. But I thought I would end this with a balance of a dose of simplicity. I've learned from the poet Maria Popova that I quoted earlier, and others who I love and respect, that there's often profound wisdom in the simplicity of children's books. So this last thing I want to share with you is from a Japanese poet, Hiroshi Osada, in his book, Almost Nothing, Yet Everything. It has no color, but can be any color. It has no shape, but can be any shape. You can touch it, but you cannot hold it. Even if you slice it, it won't be cut. It can slip through your fingers like it is nothing at all. But life would be unthinkable without it. Only oxygen and hydrogen, simple as can be. But nothing means more to life as we know it. And then finally, from Joe Z's To Melt or Not to Melt. We are tiny ice cubes floating on a boundless ocean of love. Our only options are to melt or not to melt. Resurrection is love melting into love. And Joe, you can stop the recording.